Hello and welcome to the Corporate Scrutiny Panel meeting for today. This could be the shortest meeting of the Scrutiny Panel for this year, and I'll explain why in a second or two. We'll just go through the agenda as is. Okay, I see John Taylor's coming in. Okay, so this could be quite a short meeting, John. I'll explain in a second. Membership of the committee, we've had apologies from Philip Challoner. Had apologies from anybody else? No?
No, Chair, just Philip.
I understand Philip has put some questions because he couldn't attend. If those could be answered, if we could ask for those to be answered by email and circulated to all the members present. Good. Minutes of the previous meeting. Any items under the previous meeting? No. Admission of the public. Well, this is to be held in public session, so they're welcome to attend virtually on YouTube. Any deputations of petitions? I think I know the answer to that question.
No, none received, Chair.
No public here for public questions time?
No, Chair.
Okay.
No question. Can I just ask if there are any interests just for the notes, for the minutes, Chair?
No interest, sorry.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now for people watching at home, I'm not quite sure how many there are of you. This was a one-item agenda about John Taylor is back. For people watching at home, this was a one-item agenda about the elections bill, and there is currently a fire alert in Kirkgate buildings where the elections office is. So just 5 minutes ago, the head of elections, who's a fire marshal, was not aware of a test, and therefore, unfortunately, oh, Laura is here. Unscathed.
My apologies.
Okay.
Yeah. Typical, isn't it, as soon as you go online? But, yeah.
Right, so disaster alerted, and I presume Kirkgate Buildings is not on fire.
No, they're doing some works downstairs, so they've just tripped it, but it's okay.
You were within seconds there, Laura, of us cancelling the meeting. So, do you want a second or two to catch your breath?
If that's all right, yeah. Fire marshal running around Kirkgate buildings, but no, thank you very much, Chair. I'll dive straight in. So, I've presented the report regarding the elections bill. So it was an update on where the legislation is in terms of what's progressing through Parliament at the moment. So I'd covered sort of the key areas and the requirement to provide voter ID at polling stations.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to spend a second or two just?
Yeah, if that's all right.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah,
we're okay.
sorry.
Just ask members just have a scan through the report and just see if there's anything there that they may have missed first time round. And Laura's just going to just chill for a little bit and take it easy because that's the way it should be. Okay. I'm just going to get a drink of water, Laura. If you want to do the same, you can.
Thank you.
For anybody watching, we've just had a little break because Laura, who's the elections manager for the council, has just run back after a fire alert, which turned out to be a false alarm. Okay, you okay now, Laura?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies again. We're on the 3rd floor, so I've got my steps in for today at least. But yeah, So, as Councillor Cooper said, my name's Laura Burrell and I'm the Electoral Services Manager at Kirklees. I brought the report to Scrutiny panel to provide an update on where the legislation is that's currently progressing through Parliament on the Elections Bill. The Minister has confirmed that it's due to get Royal Assent in May this year. So I provided some of the key headlines of the bill in the introduction of the report. So I've covered off the information regarding the requirement to present voter ID at polling stations and then changes to proxy and postal vote regulations. The requirement for British overseas to register to vote for Parliament in elections and the information.
You've gone on mute, Laura. I think you might have knocked your mute button.
Not having a good morning, am I? Oh, honestly. But yeah.
Easy.
So at the moment, there is a 15-year rule allowing for overseas electors to register to vote once they've left the UK. The bill also proposes scrapping that rule and giving them votes for life. So in addition to the overseas rules, there's also changes to European citizens in terms of their voting and candidacy rights at local elections. I've covered off in the report key considerations for the returning officer, as well as information for the electoral registration.
You've knocked it off again.
Sorry, I think I've got loose wire. So I've covered off the key. Sorry.
No, that's all. I'll let you know when it happens.
No problem. So some of the considerations from our point of view then is in terms of how we'll manage the administrative process of issuing voter ID cards and the changes to running elections in polling stations as well as registration. I'd covered off some of the issues around how we will deliver this as a council and what the returning officer will consider. I'm hoping that going forward we'll have a comprehensive comms campaign to make sure that all residents are informed on the changes before they get to the polling station. In Kirklees, we have local elections scheduled in 2023, and therefore I expect us to see those changes at that election. It's important to note that we do not have any of these changes will not take place at the May poll scheduled for this year. Okay. I'm happy to take any questions relating to the report, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll open it up to members present. Any questions from members present? Councillor Munro.
Hello, thank you very much, Laura, for presenting this. And I've got actually loads of questions, but I'll just try and keep it brief. So first of all, in relation to voter ID, it says that voter ID cards for people who turn up without a valid form will be issued with a free one. But how will the people checking these know that it's not valid? Because there seem to be a range of different types of ID that you can turn up with. So that's going to be, again, so my second question is, there's going to be an awful lot of check. It's going to be like passport control effectively. So we're all going to be queuing a lot more to get through passport control. So it's an extra layer that's being put in. I think it's opening the system up to more fraud in actual fact. You know, there's also an issue with where women who do wear a veil, are they going to have to be asked to remove their veil? So I've got issues around that. I think it will. I mean, ID is open to fraud. And then there's another issue of cost. Well, you know, a cost of applying for a passport now is over £100. There's a cost to all these different passes, and we're in an economic climate where, you know, there's going to be less money around. So this could actually be a huge deterrent to people who have a valid vote, a valid right to vote, will be, you know, deterred from doing so. So I've got issues around that. I've got issues around the EU citizenship. People who live in France, who live in Italy, who live in Denmark, who live in Germany, who've lived here, who may not have applied for legal citizenship. I mean, you know, I don't think it's right to be excluding them. I really don't think it's right to be excluding them, particularly if they work here, or they're married, and have their families here. You know, excluding those people is wrong. And you know, so those are some of my main issues. And I'd just like to raise a further point in relation to well, effectively snap elections as well. Not only is that difficult for the electoral registration, electoral services, it's also difficult for opposition parties. If you know, for us to actually adequately respond and galvanise, you know, our residents and our voters, it's more difficult for us too. So I think that's important as well. Those are just some of the points I just want to raise. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Alison. So Laura, any things that obviously there are some things that you can't change, but anything on there that you want to respond to?
So exactly what you said, Councillor Monroe. We're considering all the same sort of factors with the voter ID screenings at the polling stations. One thing of concern is that there will need to be private ID screening booths available within our polling station locations to provide that element for cultural sensitivities. So we'll be looking at the space that's available at the locations and determining how we can provide that facility. In terms of the full list, there will be a strong element required for training in terms of training poll staff and key electoral staff on what can and cannot be accepted. The list that's been published by the government in terms of what will be accepted will be provided at the polling stations, and we'll have to provide extra information and signage, no doubt, to make people aware. And then in advance of poll, if we're trying to run these comprehensive campaigns and outreach programmes with harder to reach groups such as the universities, as I know at the moment, one of the key issues is the student pass not being accepted by some universities. I know that they'd say they'd accept the NUS Students' Union one, but not the ID card for universities. So we're working with partners to understand what barriers they feel to the current list. And then we will try and make sure that every resident has the information of where to go to apply for a free voter card prior to polling day. Inevitably, there will be some people that may be disenfranchised, but we will put all the stoppers out there to prevent that from happening. In regards to the EU citizens' voting rights, I detailed in the report that anyone that was on the register before the 31st of December 2020 will be able to remain on the electoral register, and then there will be a voting treaty agreement that outlines the citizens of countries that are signed up to this treaty that will be able to remain as a local government registered elector. So there will be an element of the electoral services team running a review process and checking who signed up for this treaty agreement on an annual basis, and then writing out to residents to let them know. I think that's all I had for that one.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Laura. Pretty comprehensive, the results here. I have a couple of worries. I think I share the worry, and we talked about it, leading members, didn't we, about the shortened election timetable, and certainly I'm making so I'm lobbying on behalf of that as well, because I think it puts everybody in a really difficult position if there is an election called that quickly. Just to give some reassurance, both to Councillor Monroe and yourself about the checking of ID. I remember when I worked, as everyone knows, I worked in banking. I remember when money laundering requirements came in banking, where we suddenly had to start checking a lot more ID. And I think any of you that opened a bank account or moved a bank account will have gone through that joy of providing two types of ID, verifying identity and address, etc. And we had huge concerns at the time around the training and the implementation of that. And actually, it's worked reasonably well. People quite quickly get used to what they need to look for and what isn't acceptable. So I think the training there, yes, you're absolutely right, Laura, we'll need to deliver that training, but I don't think it's in any way insurmountable. The other thing that isn't covered in the report that perhaps ought to be picked up is the learnings that we can pick up from Northern Ireland, because this the requirement to provide voter ID in Northern Ireland was brought in by the Labour government back in Tony Blair's time, so has been there and is well established. So there will be processes and procedures that hopefully we can largely pick up and copy, in a sense. So I'm reassured that this is doable on that basis. My other worry is about definition, and I must confess that I haven't noticed this before. Just one of the points you make about postal voting. I'm fully supportive of what it says. It says political campaigners will be barred from handling postal votes, and certainly in my party we've made that a requirement anyway of activists. My worry is how we define political campaigners, because if that's in the legislation, you know, how do you know, it's fair enough, all of us here on, well, not yourself clearly, but us politicians on the call clearly are political campaigners. But then when you start talking about other people, how do you define who's a political campaigner and who isn't? And I think that the devil there is in the detail, and perhaps that's one we need to be picking up and feeding back. We need to be really, really clear about that, because I can see that causing problems at polling stations for polling officers, that they're trying to interpret what might be not well drafted sort of definitions. So I think that's one perhaps I hadn't picked up before, but I agree with what it's trying to do. But I just think the definition there is it needs to be really clear, and I think that's a difficult one to land. And I think that was, yeah, I think they were my main points from that. But thank you.
That was mainly commentary, which is fair enough. And anything you want to say to that, Laura?
Just that I understand the postal vote issue in terms of handling is quite a complex one, and at the moment, the view from the electoral community is in unison in that by limiting the number of postal votes that you can hand in, it may disenfranchise sort of the honest elector who might be handing in the postal votes for more than 2 people and themselves, such for larger families. I understand that the wording isn't clear, and it might be that we need to push some wording on the postal votes with information in terms of who should be handling that postal pack. And sort of the guidance we provide now, if anyone calls, is that it should be yourself or a trusted family member or friend, and not a third party person handling that postal pack.
But it, by definition, a postal vote. So why don't we tell them to put it in the post box? Because that's what I do with mine.
Yeah,
well,
I think it's the last minute element.
Yeah. Sometimes people hand them in on the day that they've got a postal vote. They'll hand them into a polling station on the day. That happens, and in fact some of us encourage them to. Okay, so right, Councillor Greaves.
Thanks. Just on that very point, if the greatest risk of people being unduly influenced or coerced in the voting is on those postal votes where they are handed in at the last moment as a bullet job, because it kind of begs the question of why haven't you just filled it in and posted it in? How much assistance do you need to get it in there? And like you, John, and political campaigner, well, I think that there'll be a lot of people who would probably decide to define themselves as not being political campaigners, where everybody else might have a completely different opinion. But that's my big area of concern. But it has, regardless of these changes, I think that's where my concern is. So in respect of this, my questions, Laura, are about the voter card. Okay, so the main bits of ID, I'll have no problem with. And a lot of people won't have a problem with, because you're talking passport or national ID card, then you're talking photo card, driver's license. Some of the other ID stuff is a bit random. I think the core ones are going to be passport, driver's license. But for people without, it then says you can use a voter card. So just talk to us about a voter card. Who's going to be producing them? What kind of level of resourcing is going to be needed? How long is it likely to turn them around? And how different is giving somebody a voter card to giving somebody a postal vote? Is it effectively the same process? And then the other bit with it is, what additional restrictions are being brought in respect of postal voting through the ID, or is there effectively no impact? A few for you there.
No problem. So the ID card element, it'll still be a 2-step process. So the first step is that you would need to be a registered local government or parliamentary elector. So they would still need to register to vote in the normal way and be on the register before that ID card can be issued. So there's a bit of an element in terms of the statutory deadline to register to vote in an election timeline, and then the time following that to issue an ID card for those last minute applications.
Right.
So the government at the moment are looking into a central application system, a bit like the gov.uk registration portal, where people could apply for a voter card and then they would be issued from it centrally, not from us directly. It's likely, though, that during snap elections or at peak times in an election timeline, that burden of work will fall to the electoral registration officer, as they won't be able to turn them around quickly enough to get physical cards out. It might be that maybe we could issue temporary ones in the short term. And if paper applications are coming in for the ID cards, because there will be the online application process, the paper process, and in-person applications at electoral services offices. So it's likely that we will see peaks and troughs throughout the year. We would process any applications that come in. My understanding is that we may then upload that information to a central portal throughout the year, but then when it's on a shorter time frame, we might issue something in-house. The level of detail in terms of the actual production of the card that's been provided to electoral registration officers is not great. At the moment, we're waiting for finer information in secondary legislation to come through on sort of the design of the card and the issue process. But it is likely that we'll see applications at Kirklees. At the moment, the government are predicting a 2% application rate of the electorate. I expect it to be higher in an area like Kirklees, but only time will tell after the first election. So we, like I said, will sort of have that two-step process, and there will be a sort of key time frame between the deadline to register to vote to when the card can be issued. And at the moment, my understanding is that it's expected to be the day before poll as a deadline to issue these cards. So again, that's a resourcing issue in terms of the elections team on how we get these cards out to voters for polling day.
Okay, thank you.
And then are there any changes? I'm going to come back on some of those points, but are there any changes to the postal voting system in terms of ID requirements?
So last Friday, late in the day, Friday afternoon, there was a policy statement that was published by the Minister relating to an online absent vote application portal. So at the moment, you have to apply for a postal vote by a handwritten form. That form can be signed by hand and completed by hand, but then scanned to us or delivered by hand or in the post. There are proposals to have an online portal so people can handwrite their signatures and then upload a scanned image to the portal to apply for a postal vote.
Okay, well, that might make life a bit easier then, might it?
I think it will have its benefits, but there'll also be concerns from my point of view as an electoral administrator in terms of an increase in applications, especially in shorter election timelines, as they'll come through more frequently. And then also in terms of the quality of forms and signatures that are coming through, whether or not we may have to look at them and reject them last minute and communicating that to the elector via the online portal. They are talking about doing an identity check for postal vote applications as well. The policy statement that came out on Friday talked about doing a national insurance number and date of birth check before that postal vote can be processed. So there'll be a sort of a two-step process again for any registered electors that would like a postal vote.
Okay, so just to go back then, these automated centralized systems, they're likely to be, I would imagine they're going to be based a lot on credit check data to confirm somebody's address and maybe to maybe ask questions that perhaps only the individual will know the answer to. The issue with credit checks is that the same part of the population that might not have a driver's license or a passport may also are more than likely to be the people who are difficult to find on a credit search because they've moved locations on a regular basis, and or they may not have a lot of official links. So it may be that gas bill and electric bill isn't actually in their name, and they've just got a token card, or it could be that they've moved around a fair old bit. From my work with Citizens Advice, we had real issues at times in trying to get previous address information for some clients, some of whom couldn't actually remember where they'd lived over like a 5-year period, especially where they'd been moving around or been moved into provided accommodation on short-term basis. Which then means if the automated systems, so the people are going to be relying perhaps on the automated systems who get bounced by that, will then turn up in person for you to deal with, but they're likely to be the hardest of all to verify. So what additional financial support is coming forward for the electoral teams to help pick up where the systems is failing? Because we know from our own work, you know, digital by default, digital by design, whatever, that's great for the vast majority of the population, but it's a nightmare for those people who aren't digitally engaged. So what extra support are you going to get to be able to effectively do the manual side of things?
So I'll just confirm that if anyone who's applying for that voter card, they would have to be on the electoral register prior to getting that voter card. So in terms of identifying them, we would check the electoral register, because that ID check should have been done for them to then come on the register, and then we can issue the voter card. We do have at the moment, if people don't have their national insurance number, we ask them to provide, you know, like you said, electricity bills or council tax bills in their name to get them onto the electoral register. But anyone who's applying for the voter card should already be on there. So we would check that against our records. Central government uses the Department for Work and Pensions data through the national insurance check, because they've issued the NI number, so it should match their records, their name and date of birth and NI should all match centrally before it comes back to us to go on the electoral register, and then we would run that check, that ID check at that stage to issue the voter card.
Okay, so just one last question and I'll hand back. After you've put them on the electoral register, what additional items are going to be checked in order to decide whether or not to issue somebody with a voter card? What exactly are they going to be asking for in terms of verifying that that person is the same person?
So once they're on the register, the applications that come in should confirm, as I understand it for now, again, we're still waiting for a finer detail, will be the name and the address of the applicant. Potentially, they might ask for a declaration that says they don't have a suitable form of ID as listed, as prescribed, and then we would do the check on their name and address to the electoral roll and then issue the ID card. So if they came in person, it's likely we'd have to take a photograph to issue the ID card.
Right. Okay. And then when they actually went to vote, would that photo be verified again, or?
It would just be that if you present your ID, that the photo on the ID should match the person with the card at the polling station.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Just to pick up your last point, in terms of funding, we are waiting for information and expecting it soon from central government in terms of what funding will be provided to the electoral registration officer.
Yeah. So my parting comment on this, I can see for about 90% of the population, this is going to be simple and straightforward, but I can't help but wonder what kind of a muddle it's going to be for some people, and that muddle's going to drop in your lap.
Yeah.
and also whether it will disproportionately affect some members of the population more than others. So that's the concern, I guess. Is in terms of equality impact, has that been properly measured as part of this? I mean, my own personal view is that it's solving a problem which doesn't exist, and there's not. I guess as professionals, there's not been a big call from the people who work on elections around the country for this bill to happen. Really, is there? It's not really come from. It's not come from professionals going, we've got a real problem here. We need this sorting out.
Exactly.
Am I wrong there, Laura?
No, you're not. I mean, we have an association, which is the Association of Electoral Administrators, who are directly consulting on the bill and work closely with members of Parliament in relation to what they're trying to bring in, and they have also expressed their concerns on some of these changes in terms of the permanent burden of work that's been passed to the electoral registration officer and returning officers to deliver this. Ultimately, we will because we'll have to, but there's undoubtedly it's going to be challenging.
And you know, what your service has been over the last few years has done a remarkable amount of work in some very trying times. I've been very impressed by the way you've handled things with you know, referendums, by-elections, general elections at short notice. It's been an interesting few years for you, that's for sure. Okay, any more questions? Okay. Thank you for that. Just sure. So as far as it was a one-item agenda, we've got a big agenda lined up for March, and we didn't want this to sort of carry on, be another thing on the agenda for this. So that's the reason why we have a one-item agenda. I know it's rather short, but it means means we haven't got problems later. Okay. So with all that done, I will now draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.